Welcome to MACC Talk, a Middle Tennessee podcast from Mont Haven Arts and Cultural Center in Hendersonville, Tennessee. I'm your announcer, Kennedy Galpin. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends at Nashville Interiors magazine. Nashville Interiors, inspiring us with homes that are the very definition of beauty.
Thank you, Kennedy, and welcome everyone to MACC Talk. I'm your host, John Pitcher. We like to think of the MACC as a cultural town square where we encourage everyone to be their creative best. Our guest today is Jim Sherraden, who made his name as manager of Nashville's iconic Hat Show print. Hat Show print is best known for its long association with Nashville's music industry. So, Kennedy, that makes me wonder, do you have like a favorite music image or album cover?
I would say I have a few. I will say one of my favorites right now has been the band Justice. They have a singular motif that carries over across all of their album covers, which is a cross. And since their album in the early 2000s, they have carried over that motif until now. And it changes throughout every single album they put out. So it's kind of interesting to see what they do every single time.
And you have drawn some of those yourself,
I've done one
which
of
I may
them.
have to rerun on our blog post so that people can kind of see what
or I can
you're
at least give
doing.
you the image of their albums.
Yeah.
And then the Gorillaz. Their album covers change every time, but the band itself is hand-drawn by Jamie Hewlett.
Oh, okay.
He's a British artist. He did Tank Girl as well.
Uh-huh.
But they're also hand-animated. So they actually move, they're drawn, they're completely a band that is art itself, which is really fun. And they have a new album coming out.
That is pretty cool.
So it's kind of timely.
Well, my all-time favorite, without exception, is Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass and his Whipped Cream and Other Delights.
Ah, yeah.
That's just fun. So
Can't
just
go wrong with that.
For register. Okay, well, let's go ahead and introduce today's guest. Jim Sherraden's name is synonymous with Hat Show Print, the iconic letterpress poster and design shop in Nashville, Tennessee. Over the course of his 34-year career with Hat Show Print, Jim oversaw the shop transition from a technological curiosity to world-renowned icon of American culture and design. Jim is here today to talk with us about his storied career and about his upcoming exhibit titled From Brayer to Brush, which runs in the MACC's Papillon Gallery from February 21 to April 5th, 2026. We're thrilled to have Jim with us today. Jim Sherraden, welcome to MACC Talk.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Pitcher.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you are one of Nashville's best-known printers and artists, and I love printing. I can't think of actually a more consequential invention of humanity than printing and the printing press. I mean, when you think about it, when Gutenberg perfected his printing press in 1450, it gave rise to the Protestant Reformation, to the Age of Enlightenment, to modern democracy, and now eventually to really great art. And I'm wondering, what drew you into this amazing, noble, and incredibly creative profession?
You're kind to ask, and my goal today is to have brief answers. I was raised in a home of music in Kansas. Art was never really pushed, but they're interchangeable to a lot of people in the creative arts. But I always was interested in design. In our church, there were stained glass windows that captured my attention when the pastor couldn't, and I loved automobile design. And fast forward, I'm living in Nashville. I was here for the music industry, go figure. And as I'm fond of saying, to stay in the family will of educators and attorneys and teachers, in an effort to stay in the family will, I thought I better go back and get my degree. So I asked a perfect stranger what was easy, carpooling from Nashville to MTSU in Murfreesboro, and he shrugged his shoulders. He said, "Man, I'm in printmaking. That seems pretty simple." And I followed him like a lost dog to class. I fell in love with it. I ended up graduating with the usual degrees, the history, the English, the foreign languages, 9 whole hours of printmaking, but it completely changed the trajectory of my life. And I had rinky-dink art shows and rinky-dink restaurants, and this art teacher from Vanderbilt saw my show and said, I got to show you this dying old show poster print shop in downtown Nashville before it goes out of business.
And dying old print shop.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was what it was. And I said, what's a show poster? And she took me to Hatch, and I walked into this mausoleum gasping its last breath. And 42 years later, even though I'm not associated with the shop anymore, incredible director down there, but I'm very glad that's going to be on the tombstone.
Okay, there you go. Well, let's back that up a little bit. Hatch Show Print, that is a legendary institution in Nashville. Tell me a little bit about it, and tell me a little bit about its history and why it is so cherished here in this city.
That's a podcast in itself. First, let me tip my hat to the director since 2013, Selene Aubrey. She's been doing a great job. It's been owned by the Country Music Hall of Fame since 1991, a gift from Gaylord Entertainment, the for-profit, Grand Ole Opry, WSM, et cetera, But Hatch was founded in 1879, well known for its vaudeville, circus, minstrel, carnival, all these posters, string band, bluegrass, rock and roll. And I think one reason why that place never went out of business is because of its location in downtown, in the United States, downtown Nashville. Remember, Nashville is within 500 miles of over 75% of the U.S. population. So whether you're Bessie Smith or the Beastie Boys, you're going to play Nashville, and you needed a poster. So I'm going to clean up your question and say it this way. Founded in 1879, Hatch was one of the 6 largest printing plants in the United States. It made it through all changes of technology, but believe it or not, radio started taking its customer base away. And while the shop was never in need of renewing its machinery, letterpress, very durable, wood type, very durable, it just didn't seem to have a place in the market in the 80s. So I got in there. I was waiting tables at Mark's 325 when Gloria, the Vandy art teacher, brought me in there. And what I think is important is I walked into there as a printmaker, not a printer, and those are 2 different things. So I saw the beauty, I saw the color, the richness, all these beautiful blocks carved. I learned to be a printer, and I had a great mentor named Kenneth Henson. He died in 2000, but it's important to know that I didn't go straight, from art school to abstract painting, these monoprints, and now the paper and wooden quilts that I do. I really learned how to typeset everything, like CD liner notes. I even typeset. So while I was doing that, and we were resurrecting the shop, getting it to a break even, and now a place where it pays for its own real estate. That being my mantra, this place can pay for itself. Every time you run a paper through the press, that's a dollar bill, right? Once we got to where the business was coming in, I turned and looked at the archive as potential pieces of art. So I started making the monoprints, bringing the old antiquity and the design of the blocks into a contemporary marketplace, giving them a new context. And I call them the greatest hits now. I still go in and make a few of those a week, but most of my time is spent with the paper and wooden quilts that will be on display here at Mott Haven.
We're speaking with print artist Jim Sherraden. We'll be back after this important message.
Nashville Interiors Magazine is a proud supporter of arts education. The arts foster creativity, critical thinking, and emotional expression. It's not surprising that students engaged in the arts often perform better academically. They certainly learn how to think creatively. Our friends at Nashville Interiors Magazine love creativity. Their mission, after all, is to inspire us with homes that are the very definition of beauty. For more information, check out their website at nashvilleinteriors.com.
We're back with print artist Jim Sherraden, who's here to talk about his exhibit From Brayer to Brush. The exhibit runs February 21st to April 5th, 2026 in the MACC Papillon Gallery. Well, you mentioned radio, and I think that's very fascinating. Of course, these prints, these posters in the early part of the 20th century, in the mid-20th century, were used as advertising, right? So you would have them hanging up in Woolworth, or you would have them hanging up on a telephone pole or someplace, and it would say, hey, this concert's coming up. And talk about serendipity, I think one of the main locations of Hat Show Print was 4th Avenue behind the Ryman.
Yeah.
Of course, the Ryman at one point, early on in its history, had been a church. It had been a place where people went to hear opera singers. But, in 1925, not long after Hatch opened up on 4th Avenue, WSM Radio launched the Grand Ole Opry broadcast. And the rest, as they say, is history. And, of course, Hatch is right there. And this is probably one of the most powerful radio signals and radio frequencies of any station in America at that time, 1925. People in Oregon could hear it. People in New York could hear it. But obviously, people down here in the South could hear it. It created a whole new industry, and Hatch was there, and it created this whole industry of posters advertising these great country music singers who were at the Opry, and then later everyone from B.B. King to Elvis and everyone else. And so that's where a lot of the sort of aura, I think, of Hatch is for a lot of us who are fans and not the technical side.
The real address of the Ryman is 116 5th Avenue North. The address for Hatch right behind it is 116 4th Avenue North.
Right.
So I looked at a vacant Ryman for 8 years before 1994 when they renovated the place. And we did the first poster for that show. It was Always Patsy Cline, 1994.
Right. Well, you started there at Hatch in, I believe, 1984?
Yeah.
Okay. And I love the way you described the place. You described it as a mausoleum at the time when you walked in there. And you somehow, you and your comrades in ink, somehow or other managed to turn that around. And you mentioned monoprints, and I did study a little bit about that. Tell me how did you turn it around so that today, it's going strong and it's paying for itself, very importantly, and just cranking out great work. How did you turn it around?
I think that there was a lot of serendipity there, and one of the things is all technology changes, all technology is in a circle. I call the digital era, the internet, say what you will, the greatest thing that ever happened to Hatch because it gave us a niche market. And the posters ceased becoming a tell you or sell you item, and that's what the Toulouse-Lautrec posters were. They were a tell you and sell you item. And even though he worked in stone lithography and Hatch's letterpress, a lot of the techniques or the results are the same. Mm-hmm. Once the poster ceased becoming a tell you or sell you item, because along with the digital era, record sales plummeted. Napster, Spotify, Rhapsody, Pandora. And so bands were looking for new ways to generate revenue on the road, having to tour a lot more, and having a good poster, a letterpress poster from what was becoming now an iconic letterpress shop in an iconic city really helped out. So I'd say for the last 20 years, maybe 25, the hatch poster has ceased becoming a tell you or sell you item, and it's now a commemorative item that you pick up at the event, which gives the designer a lot more leeway. I mean, Jason Isbell's name doesn't have to scream across the top of the poster like Johnny Cash's used to. Mm-hmm. Isbell's name can be half-inch tall on the bottom because you've already committed to the show. You bought the ticket. You're sitting in your seat. You got the poster under your arm to commemorate that evening. So there's a lot more room for design, which is why I think the posters are so striking. The great staff down there, the work that they do, unparalleled.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I want to ask is what makes these prints so great? What makes them so much more desirable than just something that would have been made on a computer?
Always that question. Visceral feeling. There's you can look at the typefaces and see that they're wood. When you design something digitally, it's one part of your brain you're using. I would say there's a whole nother part. You're using your hands as well when you're making a hatch poster.
Yeah. You have a fine art exhibit yourself that's coming here to Monhaven. I don't want to dwell too much on hatch, but that 34-year stint you had there, I think, did inform what later became some really great fine art. So I do need to ask you a little bit about some of your work in the 90s with monoprints and woodblocks, because that later evolves into something else. But tell me a little bit about the monoprints and how they really kind of help turn things around and also inform what you were later going to do.
You're kind of asked, and there is a direct correlation. I love history. And I think when I got into the shop, I was as interested in the history of the place as I was the imagery of the place. So we wrote, the first book came out 26 years ago, 25 years ago. Celini and I wrote a second one. All right, so it's like going through a library and you're not even going to open the book. You can't read them all, but at least take the book off the shelf, right? Look at it. And I saw all of this artwork so well carved, designed. And as I was fond of saying, you carve these blocks once, you could carve them well and use them year after year, town after town. Okay, now they're dormant, they're sleeping. And as a printmaker, I saw the potential in it, and I had a responsibility, I think, to myself to try to print everything in there, which is what the Hall of Fame hired me to do. Okay, so when you clean a block, you run paper through it to get the ink off so that, you don't have to, with the rags and mineral spirits. So you started seeing all of these designs in there. All right, remember I said printmaker and then later a printer. Well, any printmaker saw how beautiful the head of Marcus Magician would be on top of a trailer, heading or the legs of Dancing Girls. So I was counseled to start planning these pieces, and I did that. And one that I'm most fond of is the Bill Monroe monoprint, where it's a celebration of his career. The blocks are from the 40s, the photo plates, and I had a lot of energy. I still do, but I had a lot of energy then, and started creating these pieces of art. At the same time, typesetting posters. Okay, when you put a poster in the form and you get it to the press, if you look at the back of it, it looks like a paper quilt, basically. Everybody that has a hatch poster, looks at a hatch poster, sees the letters, let's say, Foo Fighters, but there's wood in between the F and the O and the O and the O and the space and the F and the I. All right, you turn that around, if you could do that mysteriously even, you would see this incredible composition of different hues of wood and the bottom of lead type. And so there's pattern, surface pattern design. All those years I was in the shop, all those magazines we were in, I couldn't get one of those magazines to photograph the back of this. But I thought they were beautiful. All right. About 20 years ago, I start carving my own blocks. And then a good friend gives me all of these pieces of wood, 3.5-inch square, left over from when they were creating buffers for a recording studio. And I thought, I wonder what that would look like if I cut my own artwork up and put them on these blocks, multidimensional. That is not as far-fetched as it sounds, because if you're printing a poster at the shop and the J in Johnny or the J in Jason doesn't print as well as the O or the A, the rest of their name, you simply take the poster that you just printed because it's flawed, and you cut the paper out underneath that J, and you put it inside on the press under the type. So cutting the posters is not unusual. So I started making these wooden quilts. All right. That leaves what I call the fish bones, or that which falls to the floor, the leftover from my woodcuts after I created this surface pattern design, the wooden quilts. And another friend said, can I have some of those? Because I was throwing them away. They're just little threads, maybe 1/4 inch thick. It really nothing salvageable. And I thought, what am I missing? And I thought, of course, I could be making paper quilts from this. So crazy quilts, et cetera, et cetera. So I started making these compositions. I think I'm up to, of the paper quilts, I'm up to 178. I know that the most recent one is going to be in the show. I'm making a point of putting it in the show. And number 176. And then there's the Harbor series. I'm up to number 33. And I will have the 33rd Harbor series in there as well. So you're going to have a few of the wooden quilts, several paper quilts framed and on dowels. And then let's not forget the work that I'm doing with John Langford, the Chicago artist and founding member of the MACC and Waco Brothers. He and I have been working together for the last 11 years, so I will include some of his work as well that I do. I accent his imagery, build these elaborate pieces. Our artwork seems to lend itself to each other.
Right. We're speaking with print artist Jim Sherraden. We'll be back after this important message.
Nashville Interiors magazine reminds us that arts education shapes brighter futures. It encourages creativity, critical thinking, and self-expression. The arts also strengthen academic success and help students build confidence. By celebrating creativity, Nashville Interiors continues its mission of showcasing beauty and inspiration. Want to see more? Visit NashvilleInteriors.com.
We're back with print artist Jim Sherraden, who's here to talk about his exhibit From Brayer to Brush. The exhibit runs February 21st to April 5th, 2026 in the MACC Papillon Gallery. So I'm wondering, what sort of, because a lot of the work that you would do with Hatch, at least initially, is commercial work. I mean, this is sort of advertising, posters. And I'm wondering what that spark was that it sort of inspired you to take that kind of commercial work into fine art creative work. And it sounds like maybe part of it was just the inspiration of being there at Hatch and having all of their voluminous supply of blocks that were already carved, and sort of you're being able to see, well, maybe I could do this with it or do that. And then of course this guy came up with his fish bones, those other blocks, which I think, did you turn those into what you called tumbling blocks for some of that? Tell me a little bit about, because I'm going to try to keep some images of this on our blog post. I absolutely love that art. I'm just wondering what was the sort of thing that maybe sparked this transition? I'm sure it wasn't all at once,
Okay,
But you've definitely gone into from something that would have just been advertising a picture of Johnny Cash with Johnny Cash on the top, to something that really has its own value as just pure art.
I'm going to say that because they're not a tell you or sell you item, the Hatch poster anymore, the artwork that comes out of there, and I'm saying that word specifically, is as valuable as the monoprints that I used to make so often and now make, 10 or 15 a year. They both, whether it's a Ryman poster or a Sherraden monoprint, they're both paying tribute to the shop. And paying tribute to the depth of that archive and that aesthetic. And that aesthetic, very simple, as I used to say, as simple as the serenity of the South, tell you and sell you items, get you out of the coal mine and the cotton field. Okay. I tried to complicate them with these monoprints. So a lot of color and contrast, it's my mantra over the door, color and contrast. So when I started moving into my wooden and paper quilts, color and contrast followed me. That which falls to the floor, or the fish bones, as I say, was what's left over from a woodcut printed from the wooden quilt, the multidimensional quilt. And instead of letting it fall to the floor now, after my buddy said, there's value in those, I started making the paper quilts. The reference of the tumbling blocks is a whole different deal. That is a quilt pattern. That is an international quilt pattern, and it's called tumbling blocks or baby's blocks. So yes, I've done a couple of those as well.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about your process in creating these sort of works, these paper quilts, the wooden quilts, because they do look very much like quilts. They are blocks that you've created that have patterns on them and that you then arrange in beautifully symmetrical ways oftentimes. Talk a little bit about some of your inspiration there, because I know you mentioned several inspirations.
Always loved rug design. Of course, I had an aunt named Vera back in Kansas that made quilts. Whether it's a Scandinavian rug or a Moroccan tile, growing up, I was always fascinated with this. So I'm going to pause on that train of thought and tell you the three tenets shortly of what's my inspiration for making them. Lived in the Netherlands and Norway quite a bit in the 80s, and influenced by the German Expressionism, everybody from a Belgian artist named Frans Massereel to everybody's favorite Edvard Munch, the Scream. And I was carving blocks over there, and I never felt that those were meant to be commercial. But the work at Hatch was, because it's a print shop, commercial print shop. Okay. The process now that I use is literally this. I carve my blocks, print them, and then I cut those printed pieces of paper into patterns, quilt-like or those of my own design. Assemble them, watercolor, give it a good UV spray. Borders are really important. And the three tenets of what I do, and I'll cover this in the talk on March the 7th, is the first inspiration is balance of design found in nature. That's why someone who comes to one of my shows who's just been to Cuba, let's say, so, oh, you've been to Cuba, I saw so much work like this down there. or the next person who's just been to West Africa might come to the show and say, oh, you visited West Africa. You've just nailed it. Your artwork looks just like that. Or it could be they came from Turkey, or they just came back from New Mexico. While I travel extensively, it's not that I've been to any of those places, but all of those pieces of art that they're referring to fall under this category: individualization of utilitarian items. That's an academic way of saying when you make something you're going to use, make it nice. There's a pattern to it. And what's that pattern? The influence of that pattern? It's going to be that which you find in nature. There's no Seinfeld to watch, in the year 780 in the middle of Turkey. All you got to do is look at the skies and the birds and the changing of the seasons, the flora and the fauna. So when you're going to make your tile or your saddlebag, that's going to be your influence. So that's why all these people say, oh, you've been to all of these cultures. No, that stuff to me is almost interchangeable, because it's all made by humans on this one planet who are all influenced by the same thing, even though those influences, flora and fauna, animals, could be regional. And then the third tenet is repurposing of items from their originally intended use. And that's the fancy way of saying, after I'm done making the wooden quilts, that which falls to the floor, I call them, or the fish bones, use those for the paper quilts.
Right. Well, I had asked you earlier what makes these kinds of prints so much more special than something you might just design on a computer. And in a way, I think your three tenets, your inspirations there, answer that. And you're just talking about stuff that is really lovingly handmade and custom designed. It's not something you just hit the print button on.
No, I don't. When I hit the print button, it's to print out the to-do list from Monthaven, right?
It's to print out the invoice.
Yeah. the working in that shop, letterpress ain't easy. And I understand why all these folks in the 50s, when they could switch over to offset, got rid of that stuff. But I've always been drawn to process, and I think human beings are drawn to process. And so when I start, how many posters I've done. So it's easy to go into the studio and say, I'm working with my hands all day today. And it's never been tedious to me. Matter of fact, I go out of my way to make them more complicated than they need to be.
Right. Well, what's interesting, you mentioned that when you first walked into Hatch, you describe it as kind of a mausoleum. What I love about what you've done is that you have created as a value something that is pre-industrial. It is something that is really special and handmade, and that in turn sort of turns it into art.
I think the era that we live in, screen-saturated society, there's that deep appreciation, hardwired for process. There's 1,000 ways to say it. And I'm glad my name's attached to that place. They will always be doing good work if it keeps up the way it is now. The director is doing the greatest job, and I'm glad I get to be allowed in every now and then to make my artwork. Yeah,
well, one of our healing art facilitators here, Val Adams, he creates these wonderful metal sculptures, often just recycled from whatever factory part he can kind of come up with. Well, his rationale, his value that he places on that, he says, we live in such a disposable society. And that's something I just reject. I don't want to, I don't see all these things that I've made the art out of as just throwaway items. They're things that have the potential to really live a transformed, reincarnated life, and it turns that into art. But I think we do live in a disposable society and a screen-dominated society, but I think there is a yearning for something much more permanent and much more special, much better. And I think the work that you do most certainly kind of captures that value system in a wonderful way.
And thank you for that, as does the work that's on display now. Summers Randolph, Polly Cook, friends for a long, long time. Hardworking people, beautiful work, and fulfilling their self-imposed mandate to make a living in the creative arts, as I'm doing, and as I hope all people who want to involve themselves in this endeavor are able to do.
You have also created some really wonderful artworks. You've alluded to this with the Mecon's rock star John Langford. Tell me a little bit about those. I was looking at some of them, and I kind of got the sense that this guy was a bit of a Grateful Dead fan.
I don't know if that's the case.
It may not be, but I could sure see him working for the Grateful Dead and doing album covers.
Well, I think, and I call him Drogo. He calls me Bishop, which is a whole nother story. That's podcast number 7.
Okay.
But he all of the reptile magazines, you go into his bathroom, there's a pile of them. I think he's always been drawn to the reptilian world, and I gotta pull him off of that sometimes. But we'll have 4 fish guitar players in the show. All right. An honest official answer. John Langford, Jim Sherraden. We used to do a lot of posters for Langford and Waco Brothers. And he played in 2002 for our art opening at Columbia College of Art in Chicago. And now fast forward to 2015, he's the guest artist at the Hall of Fame for their Dylan Cash exhibit. And Warren Denny comes down and says, "Do you want to work with this guy?" And I said, okay. And I don't need to sugarcoat this. So many artists have asked me to work with them, but what that really meant was I'm coming into the shop and I'm going to point and you're going to print for me. Mm-hmm. And I will have none of that. So Langford was on trial for the first 10 minutes. And we were to do, we had permission from Dylan's manager to typeset Girl from the North Country, the Johnny Cash, Bob Dylan song. Langford brought an image down, pre-cut, and we worked together within seconds of meeting each other. And it was equal effort, dirty, inky hands, both people, and that led to the next project, the 25th anniversary of the trio, Dolly, Linda, and Emmylou's record. We did the design for that, and then I asked him to start sending me images, and I would embellish them with hatch blocks. And then Lemieux down in New Orleans, the art gallery there on Julia Street, said, "You want to have a show?" And I said, yeah. I called Langford. He said, "Man, I can't carve all those blocks." I said, "Just start sending me your artwork." Okay. What I just said is 95% true. He starts sending me these images, and I know exactly what I want to do. And one of our very first pieces, I call it Blue Dot Cupid. It's going to be down there. He sends me the artwork, and I cut out, and I've gotten really good at cutting around his images. I cut his image out, and then I start building all of the art around it. They're fantastic, and I know you're not supposed to say that, but man, in your late 60s, and you're able to work with somebody, you got to be a chameleon, whatever line of work that you're in, especially the creative arts. So John and I work so well together because there's no ego. Why is there no ego? It's because we are within 90 days of each other's age. We both have had rises and falls in the music industry. We're both very detail-oriented, very colorful with our artwork, and we literally pass it back and forth like monks in a monastery. And the results are easy to see there. So I'm bringing 3 or 4 pieces in, but I probably have, from the 10 years we've been showing, another 12 or 15 still at the house.
Wow. What a beautiful analogy of the monks in the monastery, creating these beautiful Bibles by hand, or in your case, these amazing prints. Well, one of the absolute top shows that we've had here, at least one that really impressed me the most, was a print show. It was Albrecht Dürer.
Of course.
Oh my gosh. And I don't think I had quite as much appreciation for the incredible virtuosity. And I think that's maybe the best word, but virtuosity for what it takes to make a beautiful print. And I see that in your work, which is why I'm so excited about it. And so maybe as a final question, when I see your work, it's breathtaking, I think. And I think of everything that goes into the process of it, because that's something that's probably most of us don't understand if they haven't studied it long enough. But what do you hope people sort of take away when they see your art from this show?
Thousands of questions I've answered in my life, except that one.
Okay.
That's the first time I've been asked something like that. When you're going to look at this show, first thing you think is, all right, Tennessee has made it possible for at least this guy and many others to make a living in the creative arts. Mm. I was left alone down there in that shop, graciously and gratefully, as we put it back on its feet and got it off of its knees. And when you look at the show down there, you can think of how inspired I was in downtown Nashville at that old letterpress print shop, and what I've been able to metamorphosis into, make that transition into a valid form of art, paying tribute not only to a letterpress shop locally, but to all printmaking, and trying to do something that hasn't been done before, if that's possible in the 21st century.
Well, I think you have definitely made it possible. Well, Jim Sherraden, your exhibit From Brayer to Brush, relief prints by Jim Sherraden, will be here on display at Monhaven from February 21st to April 5th. You will have an artist talk here on March 7th. You'll be here 4:30 to 5:30. There will then be a reception. We're really looking forward to it. Jim Sherraden, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, John.
You've been listening to MACC Talk from Monhaven Arts and Cultural Center. Our mission is to educate, elevate, and encourage our community through the transformative power of the arts. If you're interested in transforming your creative life, check out our website at monthavenarts.org. Our guest today was print artist Jim Sherraden, whose exhibit From Brayer to Brush is on display at the Max Papillon Gallery from February 21st to April 5th, 2026. Our podcast music was written by Nashville composer Christina Spinay. I'm Kennedy Galvin. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.